Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Today's story is one of those moments that doesn't go viral, doesn't make headlines, but captures something far too many people, especially older women, go through all the time. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Entitled man at post office. What happened to my mom today is a perfect example of the quiet, constant battles that people, especially older folks, have to face just trying to go about their day. She's in her late 60s, a proud woman who's worked hard her whole life and is now dealing with mobility issues. She had one total knee replacement and is looking at another one soon. Getting in and out of the car is already enough of a hassle, even on good days, but today her biggest obstacle wasn't her body. It was some random man who decided he was the judge and jury of the handicapped parking lot. She'd just finished running an errand at the post office, simple stuff. She returned to her car and was sitting there checking directions to her next stop on her phone before heading out again. That's when he showed up. A random man, a total stranger, pulls up, parks right behind her, and comes up to her window like he's some kind of parking vigilante. Now, my mom has a valid handicap placard. It hangs from her rearview mirror exactly where it's supposed to be. She's had one for years because, again, 2 damaged knees, doctor-verified disability, the whole 9 yards. But apparently that wasn't enough for this guy. He marched up to her window and demanded to know if she had a handicap pass. She motioned toward it. That should have been the end of it. But no. This man, let's call him Male Karen, starts insisting she prove it, like, prove it, as in show him ID, show paperwork, justify her medical condition to a stranger in a parking lot. He even threatened to call the police. Over what? A woman sitting in her car illegally parked, minding her own business? My mom's not one to be rattled easily, so she tells him, go ahead, and then she dials the police herself. This could have escalated. It could have turned into something much uglier, especially considering how often these situations do when someone assumes guilt based on appearance instead of fact. But then a woman walks out of the post office. She sees what's happening, and without hesitation, she steps in and tells Male Karen to stop this foolishness. Move your car, she says. She's done nothing wrong, and I need to leave. Only then does the man huff, get back in his car, and drive off, leaving my mom shaken, sitting in the car she was never illegally parked in to begin with. And here's the real question. Why did he feel so entitled to confront her? Why do people like him assume that just because someone doesn't look like they need assistance, they're scamming the system? Why do older women have to jump through hoops to prove they have a right to be in a space they're already legally occupying? The answer isn't simple, but it's rooted in a toxic mix of entitlement, bias, and control. He wasn't asking because he genuinely cared about misuse of handicap spaces. He was asking because he thought he could. Because he saw someone who didn't look like what he imagined a disabled person should look like, because people still believe they can challenge others in public spaces based on assumptions and get away with it. This kind of behavior isn't about parking, it's about power. It's about how some people feel emboldened to insert themselves into someone else's life uninvited, demanding justification, demanding credentials, demanding to be proven wrong instead of just minding their own business. And it's exhausting. The irony is that people misuse handicap spots all the time, but the ones who do rarely get called out because they often look the part to people like Male Karen. A young woman helping her elderly mom out of a car? Suspicious. A middle-aged man in gym clothes parked in the same spot with no tag? Probably just running in quickly, no big deal. What my mom experienced wasn't just rudeness, it was a snapshot of the casual, constant policing that happens when someone doesn't fit the mold of what others expect. And while it ended without police involvement or, worse, confrontation, it left a lasting impression. She was trying to run errands. She ended up being interrogated in a parking lot by a man who thought her presence required justification. Because no one minds their own business anymore. Also, too many people think they're social justice warriors and are really Kens and Karens. And our second story. Sure, we'll decommission a tank if you really want us to. Back when I was in advanced training to become a tank gunner, we were in a desert training base where when it wasn't raining or extremely muddy, the fine tank pulverized powder sand would get everywhere. Not so relevant to the story, but I hated that base. One day, word comes down that all tanks that have steel bougie wheels need to replace them with aluminum wheels. Our training placed a very heavy emphasis on tank crews doing their own maintenance work, only calling the mechanics for really heavy stuff like replacing an engine. Have you ever seen the size of a 1,500 horsepower V12 engine? Since we were trained to replace a thrown track during combat situations, they figured this would be a piece of cake for us. Ostensibly, it should have been simple. We only had to replace 3 wheels, so we were relatively lucky. 2 of the wheel replacements went off without a hitch, but the 3rd wheel we had to replace was an internal wheel. Each track has 12 wheels, 6 inner, outer pairs. The only problem was none of us really knew what we were doing. For reference, each one of these wheels is a heavy mother that usually requires 2 people just to lift it, 3 to maneuver it into position. The way it works is that there's a special jack which you can insert into a regress to lift the socket at the bottom of a massive spring, the part which holds both wheels. The problem is that to replace the inner wheel, you need to remove the outer wheel first. If you do that, then once you remove the inner wheel, the entire spring/socket system will decompress, eventually resting on the track. Not knowing how to proceed, my tank commander went over to the maintenance shed and asked them what to do. Their response was along the lines of, "Why are you bothering us? The spring will lock. You're just wasting time because you don't want to work. You were told to replace the wheel, so just do it." Predictably, as soon as we removed the inner wheel, the entire system decompressed with a massive thud. The jack ricocheted away from the tank with the force of the spring decompress and another massive clang. And there was no way in hell even Superman, or a Marine, would be able to lift that spring back into position. As expected, the spring now sat resting on the track. The tank could not move because the track could not be moved. We were officially out of action. The mechanics came from their shed, cursing us for making them get off their butts. Their curses quickly raised in intensity when they realized the crap show we'd left for them. Anytime a tank's out of service, it needs to go way the hell up the command chain since it represents about 10% of a company's total force. It wasn't soon before the base commander, battalion CO, and brigade CO all come over to see what had happened. We were debriefed, but quickly found to be innocent as we did everything right, even asking the mechanics when we didn't know what to do. Turns out that when replacing the inner wheel, the jack needs to be inserted in a specific way to engage the spring's locking system, but only mechanics are trained in how to do that. The aftermath. Our mechanics had close to 100 years of service between them on armored vehicles, but none of them had any idea what to do here. After trying a bunch of different solutions and failing each time, they swallowed what was left of their pride and called the Armed Forces Mechanics HQ. Here things got worse, when even the HQ didn't have a solution that didn't require entirely removing the spring and replacing it with a new one. Eventually, it was my TC who came up with the fix, and we just dug a hole under the track until we dug deep enough for the spring's built-in lock mechanism to activate. At which point, we replaced the bogey wheel, put the outer wheel on, closed things up, and got our tank back into action. Time decommissioned, just under 2 weeks. OP, hey mechanics, can you help us do this complicated thing you're trained to do and could take a lot of work to fix if done wrong? Mechanic, stop being lazy and do it without correct training. OP, performs action and breaks tank for 2 weeks. Mechanics, surprised Pikachu face. And our last story. Entitled woman who thought she owned the park. I live near a park where a lot of people from the neighborhood go to relax, watch their dogs, or just hang out. There's also this homeless guy, I'll call him Tim, who's been living near the park for a while. Tim's actually a pretty nice guy. He doesn't bother anyone, always picks up after himself, and even helps clean the park sometimes. He's got a little spot with a bench and some blankets, and that's where he stays. People in the community sometimes bring him food or coffee, and he never asks for anything. Well, one day I was out walking my dog, and I saw this woman, classic Karen vibes, marching over to where Tim was sitting, minding his own business. She had one of those expensive yoga mats under her arm and a tiny dog on a leash. You could just tell she was looking for a reason to cause trouble. She stops in front of Tim and starts berating him about how he shouldn't be in her park, that he was ruining the view, and how he needed to get a job and stop being lazy. She was loud, rude, and drawing attention, but Tim just sat there, calmly explaining that he wasn't hurting anyone and had every right to be in the park like anyone else. She, of course, wasn't having it. She threatened to call the cops and have him removed for trespassing, even though it's a public park. A small crowd started forming because she was causing such a scene. A couple of us tried to step in, but she wasn't listening to anyone. She eventually pulled out her phone and called the cops, making it sound like Tim was some kind of dangerous vagrant harassing her, which was a total lie. Here's where it gets good. The cops arrive, and this woman puts on her best victim performance, saying how she feels threatened and unsafe with Tim around. Tim stays totally calm and tells the cops exactly what happened, but it's clear the woman expects them to side with her. But the cops don't. Turns out one of the officers knew Tim. The cop says, "Oh, hey, Tim, how's it going?" They talk for a minute, and it's clear this officer knows Tim isn't some dangerous guy, just a homeless man down on his luck who's never caused trouble. The cop turns to the woman and says, "Ma'am, this is a public park. Tim has every right to be here, just like you do." Her face completely changes. She starts sputtering, saying how it's unacceptable that people like him are allowed in places like this. She keeps pushing, asking if the officer can do something to remove him. The cop's response, "Ma'am, if you keep causing a disturbance, you will be the one removed from the park." Boom. You could hear a pin drop. The crowd was loving it at this point. The woman huffed and puffed, grabbed her dog, and stomped away, clearly embarrassed that her entitled attitude had backfired. After she left, some people in the park came over and gave Tim some food and drinks just to show support. The cop hung out for a bit to make sure everything was okay and chatted with Tim like they were old friends. It was such a satisfying moment, seeing this entitled woman get shut down and realizing that just because you're loud and obnoxious doesn't mean you're in the right. Tim's still there at the park, and now it seems like people look out for him even more. Justice served. Regardless of your personal circumstances, people are human beings who deserve respect and kindness. So many of us are only a paycheck or two away from being in this position. I'm so happy that you live in a community that understands this and have police who will uphold this right. Karens are always going to Karen. It's up to all of us to say, "Not today, Satan." Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.